Hey guys, Tim here with RedwingRC, and today we're going to do a video on how to cover a plane or surface. And this can be kind of a daunting task to a lot of people. It is a little bit of a fine skill, so practice is the best thing you can do. But with a few general tips, you can do some beginner covering really easily. So if you have a break or just a little patch you need to repair, we can get you through that. You yourself are going to have to practice these ideas over and over to become very fine at it. But you could cover an entire plane and do a pretty good job just using a few of these basic ideas. When you do inevitably have a crash or a bump, a lot of times guys want to try and just repair it without tearing the covering off. That's the worst thing you can do. Best thing you can do, tear it open, get in there, take a look at it, and I promise you the repair becomes much more simple when you can actually see how the plane is designed. So tear it apart, but to be able to do that, you need to know how to put it back together. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this project, you will need a few things. You'll need a heat gun, you'll need some gloves to protect your hands, you'll need a heat iron that's adjustable, and possibly a detail tip that you can put into a soldering iron for small spaces. The first thing to note is that all these coverings, for the most part, are going to have a backing. Sometimes they're paper, really easy to see, sometimes they're clear and not. The easiest way to do it is just get two pieces of tape, one on either side, and pull apart. If you try and do it with your fingernail, you'll probably be there all day. The next thing is going to be to know the heat point of your film. You have a heat point to adhere, and then you have another heat point to where it begins to shrink. And all these coverings have slightly different heat rates depending on brand. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and test your iron at a cool temperature with a scrap piece and just rub it down on a piece of wood and see if it begins to stick. And you can see that one does stick pretty well. But if I get another brand, possibly, we'll see, and I begin to push it down, it may or may not stick. That one did as well. Monocoat has a higher temperature in general, so it has a higher adhesive temperature and it has a higher shrink rate as well. Now that you know your adhesion temperature, you're ready to begin sticking it down to the surface. It's always easier to work with a piece that's similar size to what you actually need rather than starting with a huge overpiece size. So if you can lay your item down over the covering or even make a paper template of it on your plane and then use that paper template to cut the covering, you're going to be starting at a much better point than if you're trying to do too much at once on the surface. So the idea here is we're going to just stick this down, and you want to do this a lot like stretching a canvas on a painting, for a painting. So you're going to want to start at the edges and just tack down maybe at the top here in the middle, pull it straight down and tack the opposite corner, and then pull one side opposite those and tack it down, and then pull opposite that end. Again, trying to keep wrinkles to a minimum, but this does shrink quite a bit, so you don't need to do too much work. Again, why I'm not crazy about monocoat for covering, because it does seem like it doesn't have as good of a shrink rate. Now, you just want to kind of keep going around the edges, pulling evenly and keeping the wrinkles to a minimum however you pull. So wherever you're pulling, you want to make sure that that it's kind of pulling the wrinkles out of it a little bit. Okay, so now it's tacked down in most of the areas. Again, working from your shorter side on either side of it to the longer side, then diagonally, and then kind of filling in the spaces as you go, pulling to the outside, keeping wrinkles to a minimum. Now that you have it kind of holding on its own a little bit, you can use your iron at the cool temperature just to evenly stick down the covering wherever there's wood. Another side note, if you are joining another piece of covering on a plane already, make sure you're not over an empty space. Make sure that you're close to a piece of wood. It's very hard sometimes to press and join two pieces of covering together if there's not a solid surface nearby to work against. So your goal here is not to get rid of the wrinkles. It's just to tack down the covering in all the main areas. You do not have to press hard. This is really about the heat. The heat is what does the sticking. Just barely pressing is what helps the adhesive stick. Now, that being said, you can see I don't have a cover on this. You can buy a soft cover to put on these, but For this example, I'm just using the straight iron. It's probably better just to avoid scratches, but you can, if you're gentle and apply just the right amount of pressure, you don't necessarily need one of those protective socks. So now what you want to do is cleanly trim your edge to the edge of the surface. Now in this situation, I was patching a covering piece that was already in place and had been cut flush with this edge. Normally, if you're covering this piece for the first time, what you may want to do is have this piece wrap all the way around and then slightly around this corner, and then just tack this top piece down flush so you could trim this clean and leave a clean edge. Now what I opted to do, rather than strip it and redo it all together, is just cut this a little longer so it folds over a little bit, provides a safe barrier, and is going to stick to this. You'll notice that I cut out some wedges here, so this folds up this way. This one will fold in and over this way. We'll probably want to put that one down first and cover it with this. And then same thing here. So you can see now it's been completely adhered down in all sections. You can see how clean our seam is after having cut those notches out, folding it over, ironing it down one side at a time. Now, if this was a rounded surface, what you may have wanted to do is do tabs that looked a little something like this, so that you had minimal areas of overlap, but enough that you didn't see wood. So the idea being that you don't want so much material here that when you go to iron it down, it's going to get clumpy and look really bad. Now that we have it secured down in all the main areas, we're going to go ahead and move to our heat gun, because it moves a lot more quickly. Now the thing that you want to be careful of is that you don't get too close or stay in one spot for too long, because you will shrink it past its total heat limit to the point that it'll actually pull off or begin melting. So the best thing is use a little bit first and keep going and using more. Another thing is to take a piece of scrap and stick it on a board, or preferably an open frame, so you can practice this and see about where your heat gun needs to be. All these can be a little bit different temperature, so you do need to kind of just get a feel for this. The first few seconds it won't be as hot as it will be after about 30. You'll want to go ahead and have a glove on one hand so that as it heats up, you can kind of use your hand just to press it down and smooth it out. That'll actually help the adhesive bond to the surface. So it does require a little bit of pressure to make sure you get all the areas down tight, but not much. And again, use a little bit at first. I'm getting the whole surface. I'm not getting every wrinkle out yet. I'm just getting the majority of them out to begin. You'll see here, I've got, I started with a few too many wrinkles at the end here, so this is going to be a little bit of a battle. This is also something you don't really want to do, is join two pieces together in a middle area like this. This is just for demonstration purposes. You can also see I've got two different coverings here. This is Ultra Coat and this is Chinese Coat, and as you can see, this actually goes down really, really well. I mean, it's every bit as good as Ultra Coat that I've used, but using two different surfaces will sometimes result in more wrinkles because they're shrinking at different rates. So that's what you're seeing here as well. One last thing is you want to be really, really careful if you have a visible seam like this not to overheat it, because what will happen is the covering will pull back but show the adhesive sometimes. So you might see a little white edge begin to appear. You can see here this one has shrunk and this one is still wanting to shrink a little. So this is where we're reaching our temperature differences between them, and you can see where that adhesive is kind of showing up. Now it may be enough that with some alcohol you can just wipe that off and not have it show. But again, this is kind of showing you a couple examples of what you do and don't want to do. We can begin going across the whole surface and getting all the little wrinkles out. They may require a little bit of pressure and a little more heat. And also keep in mind that as it cools, it will actually contract a little bit more. And so the wrinkles that were just barely visible may go away. Well, there you have it. As you can see, it's a nice smooth finish. A couple things to note. I always do these things to kind of experiment for myself. And this is an example of why two coverings sometimes don't want to match, especially if you have one that has a higher, more sensitive temperature. and less sensitive. So monocoat requires a lot of heat to shrink. Ultracoat shrinks very quickly. So if you put those on top of each other and try and heat it, you're going to have two different surfaces shrinking at different rates, and you're going to end up getting bubbles no matter what. So if you were in this situation, for some reason you were trying to do that, it might be better to tear off all of it and go down to a corner, or just recover the whole thing in the proper covering, the same covering, or start over from scratch with one single covering. Also, I did use some alcohol to clean up this edge, and it cleaned up very nicely. So really the only issue that we have is the bubbles between the two different types of covering. Well, there's the basics of covering. Mastering it is another story, so get to practicing. That's the only way to learn. And thank you again for watching RedwingRC and for your support.